We were miles away from any sign of life when our fuel gauge dropped dangerously close to empty. The highway stretched endlessly in front of us, and the only thing we could see was flat and dry land on both sides. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling creeping up my spine. I glanced at Emma, who was sitting beside me, and her eyes were darting from the rearview mirror to the empty road ahead. Tommy was asleep in the back seat, and his more quiet breathing was the only sound filling the car. "There is a gas station up ahead," Emma said, and her voice was soft but urgent. I looked out the windshield and squinted through the dust that seemed to settle over the entire world. Then I saw a faded and creaky sign appear in the distance, but it was barely visible against the dull sky. The gas station stood alone, with weeds creeping up around its cracked pavement like they were trying to swallow it whole. The building itself looked ancient, as if it had been abandoned for years. The windows were covered in layers of dust, and the sign hanging above the entrance swayed gently in the wind with a soft and unsettling creak. "Let's just pull in there. We don't have much choice," I said, and tried to stay calm. But Emma didn't respond right away because she looked uneasy. But we were running low on gas, and this was the only option. Then I said, "You okay?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, just something feels off about this place." I raised an eyebrow and said, "It is just a gas station and it is fine, we need fuel." But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the strange feeling I had in my own gut because I felt like there was something about the place. The way the wind howled through the overgrown grass, the silence that seemed to hang thick in the air. If I let myself think about it too much, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, we pulled the car up to the gas pumps, and I parked it with a slight jerk. I turned off the engine, and suddenly the silence was deafening. The air was thick with stillness, and the only movement was the swaying of that old and creaking sign. Emma looked at me again, and her lips were pressed together as if she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how. Then she opened the door, slowly, and her footsteps were almost too quiet as she stepped out onto the cracked pavement. I sighed and got out myself, walking around to the back of the car to grab the gas can. "Let's just fill up and go," I said, and tried to sound reassuring, but even I wasn't sure if I believed it. Tommy shifted in the back seat, rubbing his eyes and mumbling something about wanting to see the inside of the station. "Stay here, Tommy," Emma said sharply. But Tommy had already pushed open the door and was climbing out. He looked up at the gas station and his eyes were wide with curiosity. "I think I see someone inside," he whispered. His voice was small, but his words sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Tommy, don't say things like that," I said, and tried to brush it off. Then, Emma stepped closer to me and her face was pale. "Michael, I really don't like this." I forced myself to shake it off. "It is fine and we are fine. Let's just fill up and go." But I knew we wouldn't be able to just drive away that easily because I felt like this place was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to make the next move. Suddenly, the door to the gas station creaked open and a man stepped out. He was a tall man, with a weathered face that seemed to have seen more years than most people would in a lifetime. His clothes were old with worn-out jeans and a faded jacket, but I felt like there was something about him that didn't quite fit in with the world around us. "Howdy," he said, and his voice was gravelly as he stopped a few feet from us. I wasn't sure what to make of him, because his sudden appearance startled me, especially in such an isolated place. "I am Nathan," he added and wiped his hands on his pants. "Car broke down just down the road. Seems like no one's been here in years, huh?" He smiled, but there was something off about it, like he was trying too hard to be friendly. I nodded and tried to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it is. Pretty empty around here." Then, Nathan's eyes darted to Tommy, who was still standing by the car, watching him with a strange expression. Then he looked back at me. "You folks need any help? I can take a look at that car of yours if you need," I replied back quickly. "We are good for now. Just need to get some gas." Nathan's gaze lingered for a moment as if he were studying us. Then he said, "You sure?" Nathan asked again and took a step closer to the car. "I have got tools inside and be happy to lend a hand." "Thanks, but no need," I said. and tried to keep my tone polite but firm. "We will handle it." "You sure you don't need anything?" Nathan's voice had lowered slightly, and it was almost as if he was speaking to himself. "I mean, it is not often folks stop by this old place." The way he said it made my skin crawl, but before I could respond, Tommy spoke up. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, and his voice was barely audible. "He is not real." I turned to him quickly and my heart was pounding. "What do you mean, Tommy?" Tommy's eyes were wide and fixed on Nathan with an odd intensity. "He is not real, and I can tell." Nathan seemed to catch the edge of Tommy's words, but he didn't react and his expression remained unchanged. I glanced at Emma, who looked as confused as I felt. Could Tommy just be imagining things? It didn't make sense. "We are fine," I said, and tried to shake off the feeling that had suddenly crept up again. "We will just take our gas and go." Nathan nodded, but his eyes didn't leave us. The silence stretched again, and it made the air feel even heavier. "Well, all right then," he said slowly and stepped back. "If you change your mind, I will be inside. You can come and find me." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the gas station, and the door swung shut behind him. I felt the tension in my shoulders relax, but only slightly, because something about him didn't sit right. And Tommy, his words echoed in my mind. "He is not real." Then I looked at Emma. "Did you see how strange he was acting?" Emma nodded, slowly, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah, he was off." I looked at Tommy, who was now quietly sitting in the car. His hands were tightly clutching the seat. "Tommy, what did you mean? Why did you say Nathan isn't real?" Tommy met my eyes, and his gaze was more serious than I had ever seen before. "Billy told me," he said softly. "Billy says Nathan isn't real. He is not like us." A chill ran down my spine. Who was Billy? And what did he know about Nathan? This whole situation was starting to feel too strange, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. We still needed gas, and we still needed to get out of here. "I am going to fill up," I said, and tried to keep my voice steady. "You stay in the car, all right?" Tommy nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Neither was I. As I filled the gas tank, I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around me. The air felt thicker and colder somehow, as if the world was holding its breath. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Michael," Emma said suddenly and broke the silence. "Look at this." I turned to her and I saw she was standing near the gas station's front door, staring at something on the dusty walls. Then I saw there were drawings on the dusty surface of the walls. They were simple, childlike drawing figures, and some with large eyes, others with strange and crooked smiles. They were scattered across the walls like someone had been doodling for years. It wasn't just the drawings that bothered me, but it was the feeling that they were watching us. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice was low. "I don't know," Emma said, and her voice was shaky. "But look at the handprints. There is something about them." Then I looked at the dusty floor beneath the drawings. There were handprints, but they weren't the same as ours. Too small and too delicate. Tommy wasn't with us at that moment, but I couldn't help but think, could he have done this? Emma snapped a photo with her phone. "I am sending this to myself." As I stared at the drawings, I could hear Tommy's voice from behind me. "It is Billy. Billy made those pictures," he said softly, and his words were making my heart skip a beat. I turned to Tommy and my mind was racing. "Who is Billy, Tommy?" Tommy's eyes were wide and his face was pale. "He lives in the gas station with Nathan," he said quietly. "He said it was okay to draw. Billy says Nathan is just playing a game." Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down my spine as I glanced back at the drawings. The figures on the walls looked almost too real. And Tommy, he wasn't just talking about some imaginary friend. Was he? "I don't think we should stay here. This place isn't normal," Emma said, and her voice was trembling. I agreed, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Something on the wall that hadn't been there before. A new drawing. One that wasn't there a second ago. A face, and it was pale and twisted face staring back at me with hollow eyes. Suddenly, I felt a cold rush of panic wash over me. The air seemed to grow even heavier. And that is when I realized, whatever was going on here, we weren't alone. As I stood by the old gas station counter, I felt a growing sense of unease. Emma had been quiet for a while, and I could tell something was bothering her. She was flipping through some old newspapers she had found, and I couldn't help but wonder what had caught her attention. "Michael," she said, and her voice was shaky. "Look at this." I walked over to her and expected to see something about the station or the town, but instead, Emma had uncovered a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, and she pointed to one of them. "It says here that a family died in a fire at this gas station," she said, and her finger was tracing the headline. "It happened years ago, but the fire was so bad and they never found all the bodies." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. A fire? Was this why the place felt so empty and so wrong? Suddenly the air felt heavier now, like something was hanging over us. Then, Emma continued, and her voice was low. "There is another photo here." She flipped to a black and white photograph, showing a man standing next to a young boy. "Look," she said, and her finger was pointing at the boy in the picture. "This looks just like Billy, the one Tommy was talking about." I squinted at the photo. The boy in the picture had pale and hollow eyes. His face looked almost too lifeless, and I couldn't deny the resemblance between the boy in the picture and Tommy's description of Billy. "Emma, it is just a coincidence," I said, and tried to shake off the feeling that was creeping up on me. "This place has been abandoned for years. It is an old story and there is no way." But Emma wasn't listening to me. She kept flipping through the clippings and her eyes were widening with each new discovery. The more she found, the more she seemed convinced. "I think Billy might have been the son of the station owner," Emma whispered, and her voice was barely above a breath. "And the fire. Maybe it wasn't an accident." I could see the fear in her eyes now, and it made my stomach twist. But I wasn't ready to believe it because I needed something more solid and something I could hold on to. "Emma, we don't know for sure. It could all just be a tragic accident. There is no need to." Suddenly, Tommy's voice interrupted. "Us. Billy is mad," he said, and his face was pale. "Billy is angry." I turned to look at him and my heart was pounding. He was standing by the door and stared out into the darkening world beyond the gas station. There was something in his eyes, something distant and cold. "Tommy, what do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. But Tommy just shook his head. "I don't know," he said, almost to himself. "But Billy is mad at us." I swallowed, hard. Could it be true? Was Billy really the spirit of the boy in the photo? And if so, what did he want with us? For a moment, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. We were no longer just stranded at a gas station. We were trapped in something much darker, and something I couldn't explain no matter how hard I tried. As Emma looked back at the photograph, her face was pale, and I felt the weight of the past pressing down on us. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't ended with the fire. It had only just begun. The darkness outside the gas station seemed to stretch farther as the night wore on. It wasn't just the lack of light that made the world seem so empty. It was the feeling of being watched. It was like the shadows themselves were waiting and moving with every breath we took. We had just finished looking through the old clippings when the first whisper came. It was soft, and it was almost like the wind, but there was no breeze. Suddenly I froze, and my heart was racing in my chest. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, and her voice was shaking. I nodded, and I was unable to speak. The whisper seemed to echo through the empty station, coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Then I saw it, a shadow, flickering just beyond the reach of the dim. "Lights! Who is there?" I called, and my voice was sharp, but no one answered. The shadows danced around us, growing larger and more distinct as if something, or someone, was moving just out of sight. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. I could feel it on my skin, and it was a chill that made my teeth chatter. And then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was a man, but not in the way a man should be. His shape was distorted as if he were made of the very darkness around him. His face was pale and it was nearly glowing in the dim light, but his eyes, they were empty and hollow. "You shouldn't be here," the figure whispered, and his voice was echoing like the wind. Suddenly, I took a step back and my pulse was pounding in my ears. "Who are you?" I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. "I am the Watcher," the figure said, and his voice was low and cold. "I have watched this place for many years, and you are in danger." I looked at Emma and Tommy, who were both staring at the figure with wide eyes. "What do you want from us?" The Watcher's eyes seemed to grow darker. "You have disturbed the balance. The spirits of this place demand restoration. Leave now, or face the consequences." My heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by restoration? And how could we leave when the car wouldn't start? We had tried earlier, but it had been as if the car refused to move, as if something was holding it in place. I turned to the door and my mind was racing. We need to get out of here. But when I reached for the door, it wouldn't open. It was as if the station itself had changed, as if the land had trapped us here. The surroundings seemed to shift. Suddenly, the lights were dimmer and the air was heavier. It was like the station was alive and it didn't want us to leave. "Michael!" Emma said. Her voice was filled with fear. "What is happening? We can't leave." I looked back at the Watcher. "What have you done to us?" "You can't leave now," the Watcher repeated. "Not until the balance is restored." Wave of dread washed over me. We weren't just trapped physically. We were trapped in something far worse. Something that could only be fixed by facing the past. Suddenly, the Watcher had disappeared as he had appeared, and he was leaving us standing in the gas station, unsure of what to do next. The air was thick with tension, and my mind was racing. We couldn't leave, and something told me that if we didn't figure this out soon, we might never leave at all. Emma was the first to speak. "We have to find a way to fix this. We need to restore balance, like the Watcher said." "How do we do that?" I asked, and felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I think I know," Emma said slowly. "I found something. In the old clippings, a story about the fire. It mentions artifacts, things that were important to the family that died here." I felt my heart sink. Artifacts? What could that possibly mean? "What kind of artifacts?" I asked, and tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know yet," Emma said. "But I think they are hidden around here and we have to find them." Reluctantly, I agreed, because whatever these artifacts were, they might be our only chance of escaping this place. We needed to find them, and fast. Then we split up to search the station. I started with the back room, where old shelves were covered in dust and broken bottles. Emma checked the front office, while Tommy wandered near the gas pumps and his eyes were scanning the ground. Luckily, it didn't take long for us to find the first artifact, a rusted necklace, and it was tucked inside a drawer in the office. Then I picked it up carefully and felt the cold metal against my skin. The second was a melted clock, and it was hidden behind the counter. The face was completely burned, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The third artifact was a scorched toy, a small wooden doll, and it was found in the storage closet. Each one of these objects seemed tied to the fire, and with each discovery, I felt the weight of the tragedy sink deeper into my chest. These were more than just objects. They were pieces of the past, and they were reminders of the lives lost here. We couldn't leave until we found a way to restore balance, but the closer we got to the truth, the more the darkness seemed to close in around us. We had been through so much already, old ghosts, terrifying whispers, and haunting memories, but nothing could have prepared me for what Nathan did. It all started when he led us down a narrow hallway at the back of the station. I had no idea where we were going, but Nathan seemed certain. "This way," he said, and his voice was calm. "I know how to break the curse." So I trusted him. After everything we had been through together, I thought we were a team. But as we reached a small and dark room, things began to feel off because the air was thick with tension, and I noticed Nathan was acting strange. He didn't look scared anymore. In fact, he looked almost relieved. Suddenly, he turned to face us with a cold smile. "I'm sorry, but this is where we part ways." "What are you talking about?" Emma asked, and her voice was shaking with confusion. Nathan didn't answer. He moved quickly and grabbed one of the cursed artifacts, the necklace, and before we could react, he dashed out of the room. "You should have stayed away," he called back, and his voice was echoing in the hall. "Now I will be free, and you will be stuck here forever." Suddenly my heart raced because Nathan wasn't just trying to escape. He had planned this all along. He wasn't with us to help. He was using us to break the curse, to get rid of the Watcher, and to save himself. For a moment I felt betrayed. How could Nathan do this to us? We had trusted him. But then I remembered what the Watcher had said. You can't leave until the balance is restored. Nathan had taken the artifact because he knew it was the key. We can't let him get away with this, I said and looked at Emma and Tommy. Emma's eyes narrowed. We won't, but we need to act fast. But she didn't hesitate. With a quick glance at Tommy and me, she raced towards the back of the station. I knew what she was doing. She was creating a distraction. I had no idea how she would manage, but Emma had always been resourceful. I held my breath and waited. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the front of the station. Nathan's face appeared in the doorway and he looked confused, looking toward the noise. This was our chance. Then, Emma grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him towards the back door. I followed closely behind. As we moved through the shadows, I could see Nathan still distracted and trying to figure out where the noise had come from. We rushed toward the room where the necklace had been hidden, and our hearts were pounding. When we reached the back room, I found the artifact, lying on the floor where Nathan had left it. It was just a necklace, but it felt like the weight of the entire curse was tied to it. I quickly picked it up and held it tightly in my hands. We had the necklace. Now we just had to get out of here before Nathan figured out what had happened. As we made our way back toward the exit, Emma whispered, "Let's go before he comes back." We moved quickly and our footsteps were silent in the dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan wasn't done with us. He was still out there, and we weren't safe yet. We had barely caught our breath before the Watcher appeared again. This time he was angrier. His ghostly figure seemed to grow larger as he blocked the doorway, and his hollow eyes were staring straight into us. "You think you can break the curse?" he whispered, and his voice was like wind through dead leaves. "You are not ready for what lies ahead." Suddenly the room around us began to shift. The air grew heavy, and the walls seemed to close in on us. Then, each of us was separated from the others and we were trapped in our own nightmare. I found myself alone in a dark and desolate street. I could hear the sound of tires screeching, and then I saw it. The car. It was the same car I had failed to save all those years ago. The one I couldn't stop in time, no matter how hard I tried. "Michael," a voice called. It was familiar, soft and full of regret. I turned and saw the person I had lost, the one I could never forgive myself for. "Help me," they said, and reached out to me. I wanted to reach out and grab their hand, but as I moved closer, the car's headlights blinded me and I heard the crash again, the sound I had tried to forget. I couldn't change what had happened and I couldn't fix my past. Just then I heard Emma's voice calling my name. "Michael, you have to come back." I snapped out of it and gasped for air. The street was gone and it was replaced by the gas station once more. Emma was standing beside me and her eyes were wide with fear. "Michael, are you okay?" I couldn't save them," I said, and my voice was trembling. "I couldn't stop it." "You are here now," Emma said and put her hand on my arm. "You are not alone." For a moment, I felt the weight of my guilt begin to lift. But it wasn't gone yet. We all had our fears, and we all had regrets. Then, I heard Tommy's voice, too. He was standing in front of a burning building and his face was twisted in fear. "Billy! Billy! No!" Tommy was screaming and reached toward a figure trapped inside the flames. It was Billy, the boy who had been consumed by the fire. "Tommy, don't look," I called, but he couldn't hear me. His eyes were fixed on Billy, and I knew that he was reliving his own nightmare. Emma and I rushed to him and pulled him away from the fire. But Tommy's eyes were distant, and I could see the pain in them. "I couldn't help him," Tommy whispered. "I couldn't save him." "We are all here together," I said and tried to comfort him. "We can get through this." Finally, the Watcher's voice echoed through the room again. You have faced your fears. But can you trust each other? For a moment, the three of us stood together. Our hands were clenched, and we were ready to face whatever came next. If we stayed united, we could make it through, so we had to believe that. Suddenly, the illusions began to fade, but I knew this wasn't over. The hardest test was still ahead. Now we thought we had made it through the worst, but the Watcher's power was stronger than we realized. He still had control, and we were running out of time. The only way to break the curse was to collect all the artifacts, and we still had one left to find. Just when I thought we were lost, Nathan appeared again. But this time, he wasn't the same person anymore. The anger in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Guilt, and maybe even regret. "I am sorry," Nathan said, and his voice was breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I was just so desperate." I could see the pain in his eyes. He had betrayed us, but now he was offering us something we needed. "I will distract the Watcher," Nathan said. "You can take the last artifact and you have to finish what I started." I wanted to say no, because I didn't want to trust him again. But at that moment I realized that Nathan had been just as trapped as we were. He had been fighting his own demons, and now he was trying to make things right. "Nathan," Emma said softly, "are you sure?" He nodded, and his face was grim. "This is the only way." With a final look at us, Nathan turned and walked toward the Watcher. I could see the Watcher's figure grow darker as Nathan approached. His sacrifice was the key to our escape. As we took the last artifact, Nathan's final act of redemption gave us the chance to break the curse. We had completed the collection, but the cost had been high. Then, the Watcher's figure began to fade, and the gas station slowly shifted back to normal. Now we thought we were free. But as we looked at Nathan's empty place, a wave of sadness washed over us. His redemption had come too late to undo the pain he had caused. He had saved us, but in the process, he had lost himself. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or sad, but in the end I knew one thing for sure. We had survived, and that was all that mattered. It felt like everything was coming to an end. The gas station was shaking. The air was thick with energy as we gathered in the hidden room. Now we had the artifacts, the instructions Nathan gave us, and our only hope for survival. But something in the atmosphere made it clear that the Watcher wasn't going to give up easily. "We need to destroy the artifacts," Emma said, and her voice was steady but full of fear. "The ritual will work, but only if we do it right." Tommy was holding the last artifact tightly in his hands, and his face was pale. I could see that he was nervous, but there was no time for hesitation because the Watcher's presence was everywhere, and I could feel his eyes on us, waiting for us to fail. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to help. I wasn't just going to stand by and watch Emma and Tommy do all the work. Suddenly, the gas station rumbled again, and it was louder this time. Then, the lights flickered, and I could hear the sound of something moving through the walls. It was like the entire place was alive and angry at what we were trying to do. "Michael, we need a distraction," Emma shouted. I didn't have to think twice because I knew exactly what to do. I quickly ran toward the old mechanical equipment that had been in the back of the gas station for years. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I had to try. My hands moved quickly, connecting wires and pulling levers and trying to rig the machinery to make a loud noise. Anything to draw the Watcher's attention away from the ritual. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as the machines roared to life. The lights in the room went out, and the Watcher's furious whispers echoed all around us. I knew the distraction had worked because Emma and Tommy rushed into the circle to complete the ritual. I watched as they took the artifacts and held them over the fire. The flames flickered and swirled to the building until I thought the whole room would explode. My heart was racing, but I couldn't stop now. I had to trust that Emma and Tommy would finish what Nathan had started. For a moment, I thought I saw the Watcher's figure in the corner of the room, but I didn't dare look away. Emma spoke the final words of the ritual, and the artifacts burned in the fire. At the moment, the gas station shook violently, the walls groaning, and then, suddenly, there was a bright flash of light. It was so strong that I had to close my eyes. Then the Watcher's presence vanished. and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the gas station was quiet and silent. The shaking had stopped, and it was over. Finally, the curse had been lifted. But as I looked at Emma and Tommy, I realized that we weren't the same. We had been through something no one should ever have to experience. The relief was there, but so was a sense of loss. We had survived, but at what cost? Now we left the gas station in silence. The air felt heavy, like the curse was still with us. I could see the worry on everyone's faces, but none of us spoke much. Tommy finally broke the silence. "Billy is at peace now," he said softly. His words should have brought comfort, but they didn't. The road ahead was dark and quiet. Then Emma's phone buzzed loudly and made us all jump. She looked at the screen and gasped. "It says, 'The curse is never over,'" she whispered. Suddenly, my stomach sank because we had completed the ritual to break the curse. Or had we? "Who sent it?" Tommy asked, and his voice was trembling. Emma shook her head. "I don't know." No one said a word after that. The message left us frozen in fear. It felt like the curse was laughing at us and reminding us that we were never really free. The silence in the car was unbearable, but none of us dared to speak. We thought we had escaped, but now I wasn't sure if we ever could. Back home, we all tried to return to normal life, but it wasn't easy. The memories of the gas station haunted me, especially at night. Emma, however, seemed determined to understand what had happened. One evening, she pulled out her phone and said, "I'm going to watch the videos I recorded." I didn't understand why she wanted to relive it, but I stayed beside her. As the video played, everything looked as I remembered, until it didn't. Suddenly, Emma paused the screen. "Michael, look at this," she said, and her voice was shaky. I leaned closer and I saw in the corner of the footage there was a shadowy figure. Suddenly, I felt my chest tighten. That wasn't there when we were at the station. Then, Emma rewound the video, and we saw it again. There wasn't just one figure, there were several, and stood in the shadows, and they were watching us. How did we miss this? Emma whispered, fear in her eyes. I didn't have an answer. The figures weren't just watching us, they were waiting. I stared at the screen and felt the same dread I had felt at the gas station. "Do you think we are safe now?" I asked. But Emma didn't reply. The shadows were proof that the curse hadn't ended. Somehow it had followed us home, and we didn't know what to do next. Weeks passed, but I couldn't forget the gas station. Every night I felt like someone was watching me. Emma, Tommy, and I tried to move on, but the unease stayed with us. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. "Michael, I just saw the gas station." Suddenly my heart sank. How was that possible? We had destroyed it. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the location Emma described. When I arrived, I froze. The gas station stood there, just as it had before the fire. The lights flickered eerily, and the building looked untouched. Then, I saw a traveler. He was alone and walked toward the station. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my mouth. I watched helplessly as he stepped inside. That is when the shadows appeared. They emerged from the corners of the station and surrounded the traveler. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the lights flickered again and the gas station seemed to breathe with life. I stood frozen, and I was unable to move. The curse hadn't ended. It had just started again, and it was claiming a new victim. I turned back to my car and my hands were shaking. I realized something that night. The curse was never meant to be broken. It would live on, and waiting for its next victim, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.